serving. I might start over. Thank you all for coming. This is our presentation that we gave at the National Conference for the Tourette Association. And today I'm going to talk about not only Tourette's, OCD, and anxiety, ADHD, and the comorbidities that I have and that many of us have with these afflictions, but I'm also going to talk about all persons with disabilities. Since it is the 50th year anniversary of the TAA serving this community, it just seems like a perfect time to highlight what we're all after in the disability world, and that's acceptance and dignity and respect. So you're not only going to hear about my own personal story of living with these, but as Brenda said in the introduction, you'll hear some about my son Samuel. And he was born a week late and sent home on hospice when he was 1 month old. And we were told that he was incompatible with life and we should take him home and love him because he wouldn't survive the weekend. And I'm happy to say it was one long, glorious weekend that lasted almost 12 years. And he taught me so much about life and love and what's really, truly important in life. He not only forced me to be an advocate for him, even when he was still inside my womb, I had to start advocating for him. I didn't think I had the strength to do that, but I did. And somewhere along the way, I kind of started advocating for myself. And as I say now, they kind of created a monster and didn't realize it then. So I just like to highlight, like I said, that I believe that everyone deserves dignity and respect, no matter what you can or can't do. It doesn't matter. We never cared what he could or couldn't do. We just loved him. And unfortunately, he wasn't always shown dignity and respect. And neither am I at times. And neither are many of you in the audience or your sweet kids. They're just trying to fit in and live the life that we were dealt. So I believe that needs to change. So let's get started. Okay, next slide, Brenda. Okay. All right, so throughout my talk, like I said, you'll hear the requisite referral change that of how I came about to finding out what I had and how long it took and some missed opportunities. The title of the presentation, what I wish my parents, teachers, and doctors would have known, is just throughout the presentation. I hope that I remembered to give you little notes about, this should be a red flag if you see this happening with your child or your student or a patient in your clinic, because Tourette's has been around for generations and centuries, but it's still very misunderstood, very just kind of still thought to be just quirky and not much more than that. And there's so much more to it than that. So I just want to shed light on all of those things. From my perspective, I'm just one person. And as we would say in the disability world, if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and it's the same for Tourette's and OCD. If you've met one person with this, it's one person. We all may have the same diagnosis, but we all have completely different experiences due to life experiences, but we suffer from the same afflictions. So next slide, please, Brenda. Okay. First, throughout my talk, you're going to hear me say it. And when I say it, I mean capital I, capital T, and that's what I've always referred Tourette syndrome and OCD and all its dirty little friends to encompass it. And it's just, like I said, important to remember that this is just me and no two people are the same. What I like to describe Tourette's as for myself is I've always felt like there's an invisible puppet master above my head. And he's got a string on all my limbs and my fingers and my face and my neck and my voice, and yanks and jerks. And I just want to cut the strings. And I've never been able to. And it's a constant fight against the evil puppet master. So when I talk about it, that's what you see on the surface, but it's so much of what people can't see. There's an illustration on the Tourette website that I use often, and it's of an iceberg. And here's the water. And above the water is vocal tics and motor tics. And that's what we know the outside world. That's all they can see of Tourette's. And while that is very embarrassing, exhausting, humiliating, and all of that, and it stinks every day, the real hellish part is below the water, the big part of the iceberg. And there's almost 20 different things: OCD, rage, anxiety, depression, executive dysfunction, self-injurious behavior. There's so many things. And that's what makes our life so hard and such a struggle. And that's what people can't see. And it's hard to articulate, believe me. So that's kind of why I'm doing this at my age, because I couldn't as a kid, and children out there aren't often able to describe it either. So I just would like to give a better understanding of the intensity of the demands that these disorders place on us and those who suffer from them, how all-encompassing they are, no matter how easy we may make it look on the outside, because it's certainly not easy. There's so much more often a war going on our inside. And I also want to highlight the fact and my emphasis on the importance of not only person-centered care, individualized care, but also the importance of an early diagnosis. And I like to give this illustration of perhaps a teacher notices a child in their classroom, and he's making noises and scrunching his eyes and moving his face around, tapping his desk rhythmically. Little side note here is those of us with OCD almost always have a right or a left propensity. If you ask someone that has marked OCD, are you a righty or lefty, they're going to know what you're talking about. And I'm a righty all the way. And just saying that makes me feel guilty, because as if I don't care for the left side of my body or don't think it's important. And that's just how I work. Everything makes me feel guilty. So yes, again, I thank God that I do have my left side, but I have to favor my right side. And whatever I do with my left, I have to do a double on my right. And that's been for as long as I can remember. So back to the illustration, someone's tapping his desk, maybe rhythmically, or it seems kind of rhythmically, but it's not as if there's a tune in his head, but it's rather because he has to tap that way. But it's a big class. So the teacher thinks, oh, she only has him in the room once a week and he's not hurting anyone. He doesn't seem to be bothering anyone either. So she doesn't really want to rock the boat or get involved. And if it were really a big deal, surely someone would do something, wouldn't they? But maybe no one does. And that missed opportunity could have made the difference of getting proper diagnosis sooner rather than later, down the road, when that child's tics and compulsions and anxieties have gotten worse and been exacerbated by puberty and entering high school. We're not just as teachers are noticing anymore, but so are his peers. And then imagine if he and his family had gotten a name for it in his early days. Then he could have been armed with a diagnosis to know that it isn't his fault, and hopefully discovered some tools on how to educate others, as well as strategies to help him cope with his anxiety and the rest of the comorbids before they escalate to the point of getting in trouble, failing the test, or dropping out of school altogether. And that happens regularly. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, no, back to that one. I'm sorry. Sorry about it. Okay, we're going to play a little game, a little exercise. So even though I can't see you, pretend that I can see it through the screen, like Miss Peggy or whatever during romper room, if you're old enough to know what that was. I always thought she was waving to me. So I want you to play along because no one can see you. So you've got that going for you. Okay, it's a little exercise. So first of all, I want to know how many of you can tell me at the end, how many of you on here today or watching this in the future post your bad pictures on social media. And you know the ones I'm talking about, the ones where you have a double chin, there's something stuck in your teeth, maybe you're not wearing the most flattering outfit, or just the really cringeworthy ones. So if you don't post them, how would you feel if someone else did? And the ones you couldn't delete fast enough. So I think you probably all know what I'm talking about. So now I want you to close your eyes, honestly, please close your eyes. And I want you to dig deep and imagine, reflect on your most embarrassing moment of your life. Something that happened or occurred when many people were around and you were mortified. I want you to close your eyes, keep them closed, and relive that moment in your mind. Check in with your body to see if you can remember what that moment felt like. Does your heart beat a little faster just thinking about it? Does it make you start to sweat just thinking about it? Can you look back and try to remember the look on other people's faces when that happened? Or at least what you thought they must be thinking? Did anyone notice? Or did everyone notice? Was there no hiding it? What were your thoughts and feelings at that time? Did you want to cry? Or be swallowed up by the earth? Or just run and hide? Okay, you can open your eyes now, but I want you to hold on to that memory and how it made you feel. And I want you to think about not just how it made you physically feel, but how it made you feel about yourself. Now ask yourself, did this moment last for several minutes or just a few seconds? Either way, would you want to go through it again? How about again and again and again and again every day for the rest of your life? That's a little what it feels like for us. Okay, next slide, please. There's little Jack. My kindergarten picture. So now I'm going to put a face to all of this. You've seen my face, but anyway, that's what I say when people can't see me on here. And my first memory of having tics was when I was around 6 years old. And I was sitting at our kitchen table and clearing my throat constantly, incessantly like that. I was kind of doing my own thing, not sure if I was coloring or whatever. And my mom was making dinner, and I just remember her say, "Why do you keep doing that?" And I said, "Doing what?" And she said, "Clearing your throat." I don't know. And you know, being a good mom, she said, "Well, does your throat hurt, honey?" And I'm like, "No." Well, do you feel like something's stuck in your throat? No. So why do you keep doing that? And I said, "I don't know." And I didn't know why I kept doing it. But even at that young age, I just knew I had to, or else. And I've always said, if I write a book about just OCD, all of this, which I want to someday, but one of the many titles specifically about OCD that I would like to title it is "Or Else," because at the end of every obsession and compulsion that we're driven to do, that it, you know, plants in your brain, you know, constant rapid fire, you know, whatever it puts there, the need, the pain, the urge, the sensation that feels so horrible to carry through on that ridiculous thought, idea, compulsion, ritual, whatever it is, seems so imperative to do and to get it just right, or else. And then my or else, at the end of my or else, forever, but especially growing up, was if I didn't do it perfectly every time it told me to, someone I loved was going to die. So that feeling when I say I didn't know why I was clearing my throat, but I just knew I had to, that was just the beginning of tens of thousands of things that it has made me feel like I have to do, or else. So after that continued for a while, my parents did the right thing and took me to our local doctor who was wonderful, who was very well thought of and well known, and you know our family well. And we lived in a small town. I grew up on a farm, small town in southeastern Iowa. And he was the only doctor in town, but like I said, he was very, very good. So my folks explained to him what was happening. And when he couldn't find anything wrong with me on the exam, then he thought that I must be allergic to ragweed, which seemed plausible because we lived on a farm and on a gravel road, and it was the season for ragweed. And it made sense to everyone at the time. But unfortunately, I didn't have allergies. And they were not what was causing my throat clearing tic, nor would I ever even hear the word tic until many, many, many years later. So I'd like to note here too, as I mentioned earlier, Tourette syndrome usually follows a trajectory of tics that start in the head and the neck region. That's just the way they start, vocal and or, motor tics, the blinking and everything, and then shrugging your shoulders and then work its way down its body. And for me, it's been head to toes, front and back, inside, outside, over the years, but it starts at the top. But the long path to a diagnosis can also follow a trajectory, excuse me, as well. Such as many people like me that have the clear in the throat or, things like that, coughing a lot, tics, get sent to like an allergist, or their doctor might do the right thing and say, okay, allergies, so you get sent to there. And when that doesn't pan out, then the blinking starts and the sniffing and blowing and stuff. So then we might get sent to an ENT, and that makes sense as well because of the things like that. And when that doesn't pan out, that we don't have anything wrong along those lines, and the blinking and doing that might get us sent to an eye doctor, and that makes sense as well. And that doesn't pan out either. And all of these scenarios either lead to no diagnosis at all, or sometimes a misdiagnosis. And neither of those scenarios does the child any good, and it often leaves the parents frustrated and even fearful for what might be happening to their child. All right, next slide, please. So, wow, this is a doozy of a picture. You're welcome, everybody. This is my cell phone picture. You'll see why. So in the next few years, I started developing more tics. Like I said, eye blinking, rolling my eyes, facial grimacing, shrugging my shoulders, scrunching up my nose, jutting out my jaw, making clicking noises, which I still do, shaking my head violently, jumping, and it doesn't count unless your feet leave the floor, usually for me anyway, tapping and blowing on things. The tics were increasing. At that point, there was still pretty much what we call simple motor tics and vocal tics. And while those certainly aren't enjoyable by any stretch of the imagination, they weren't as distracting as the obsessive thoughts that I was having. And that intense need to perform everything exactly right, or again, I feared that something bad was going to happen to someone I loved. But spent hours performing rituals, both physically and in my mind, in an effort to keep everyone that I loved safe and even alive. I truly believed that I, this little kid, had the power and even sadly the responsibility of people's very life on my shoulders. And the weight of that was so heavy, and the rituals and mental gymnastics were exhausting. I felt in a constant state of guilt and shame, and I knew that I was different from everyone else, but I didn't know why. And I also knew my parents loved me unconditionally, but they were under the notion, because of what they'd been told, that if I just tried hard enough, I could stop the tics and rituals. I was touching and tapping things, especially of importance, like pictures of loved ones, Bibles, crosses, my dog, and even people. I was also waving to churches and crosses on churches and in cemeteries as we drive by, even on the school bus. Everything had to feel just right. It still does. And the consequences of feeling like I hadn't performed my rituals absolutely perfectly caused me immense fear and panic. So I had no choice but to follow through on whatever nonsensical idea that it would plant in my brain, or else. And that's the dark cloud that hangs over Tourette and OCD sufferers, meaning the need to follow through with these actions is so strong that it physically feels painful to not express them, and it feels downright catastrophic to be interrupted while doing these rituals, or to not be able to do them just right, in which case we'd have to start all over. Suppressing tics is much the same. The internal angst that we feel to tic is like trying to hold your breath for a long period of time. The feeling builds up like a pressure cooker until the tic is released, so to speak. This explains why the tics seem to be quite explosive for some people. Unfortunately, excuse me, it's not a one and done scenario either. As soon as we have one tic, and for those of us with one OCD, perform one ritual, there's another one right on its heels, needing to come out to get that magical feeling so we can, quote, move on. It truly does feel like we are stuck. You can see why we struggle so greatly to be on time, to get to places, to get our work done, or be organized. Another side note here is just these symptoms and the strong feelings, the urges, the tapping, the symmetry, those types of things are very much red flags for OCD and sometimes Tourette's, and should be a red flag to parents, teachers, and providers. So despite all of these other factors, there was a lot going on internally. Externally, I had a lot of friends who participated in sports. I was president of my class since in high school. I got good grades. But internally, I lived in a constant state of fear. And my obsessions and rituals were an evil master of mine. I was afraid that if I described all of these thoughts that I was having to anyone, that I would be institutionalized. I've heard from several kids say the same thing, that we feel crazy, and we feel like we're just bad kids because we just can't get it right. And we can't just stop it like everyone wants us to. And it piles up, and we want to be like everyone, and we want to be able to comply. Like I always say, there's such a misconception sometimes that I still hear about in schools and in different places that kids, and adults, but mostly kids at that point in their life are doing all of this for attention. And I just ask people, now think about it. Even as a little kid, we all know what gets us good attention, and that's getting good grades, being kind to your elders, sharing your toys with your siblings, doing your chores, and that gets you good attention. I was doing all of those things. So who on earth would choose this that gets us ridiculed and mocked and made fun of and hurts and exhausting, and the list goes on for attention? I've never met anybody that chooses to have this or do those things just to get attention. We spend most of our waking hours trying not to be noticed in that way. So I just like to point that out because that's a misconception that really gets me riled up if you can't tell. So about this time as well, my tics started in junior high-ish, started to become more complex. I was hitting my stomach a lot. I still do. And I don't mean just hitting it. I mean punching myself in the gut, or it doesn't count, or else. That's one way to get abs of steel, but I wouldn't recommend it. I was also hitting my elbows to my thighs, flailing my arms straight out and above my head as if grasping for something that's not there. Blowing on my chest, I still do. And on things of importance, jumping over cracks in the sidewalk, linoleum, tile floors. So if you're old enough to remember the old childhood rhyme of step on a crack and break your mama's back, and that rhyme used to haunt me because my mom did have a bad back, and I was pretty sure it was my fault that I wasn't careful enough walking on sidewalks or on tile floors and at the mall, and when I did step over a crack, it'd have to be with my right foot or else. And when I ran, still, my arms would be up in the air, and my heels would have to hit my glutes with every stride. And if you're a fan of the TV show Friends, and you've ever seen the episode where Phoebe's running like a crazy woman like that, that's how I feel. My loved ones used to say, be careful when you run on the trail, you might get abducted. And I said, I'm quite sure people are more afraid of me than I am of them. But I put the softball picture up there because my rituals during that time and the intrusive thoughts haunted me so greatly. And every single ritual, I had a litany of prayers during that time as well. And I would have to say the perfect prayer, kind of like Saturday Night Live, the perfect cheer, with the perfect prayer before every pitch. So when I was a catcher, that was a little tricky. And I wouldn't always be done with my prayer. And I eventually moved to first base. And if I didn't have enough time to finish it, I had to hit my glove with my right hand and then hit my glove on my right leg and do my prayer mentally. And if someone hit the ball on the first pitch, someone threw the ball to me, I would literally let the ball hit me in the face before I could break my ritual or my trance, because someone was going to die if I didn't. And the pain of the ball hitting me in the face, sadly, wasn't as bad as the pain internally of not being able to follow through on that dire consequence, and someone would die. Okay, next slide, please. As I kept telling people, I kept saying I couldn't help it, and I couldn't. Still can't. So this is something that is kind of newer to me. I'd like to point out here the importance of education, assemblies, conferences, webinars, and especially in my case, the National Tourette's conferences. I was almost 40 years old before I ever met another person with Tourette's. And that's a really lonely feeling. I even say that I'm in that secret sorority that no one would ever ask to be in, of a mother that's lost a child. But I do have friends who have lost children as well. And there's nothing like having those individuals to talk to know that they get it on a level that most people can't. But I don't have one adult friend in my life that has Tourette's. I have some that are friends, but they don't live in this state, and I only see them at nationals, if then. I know maybe a handful or less of male adults that I would consider friends that I could open up to, but again, different states, but no female adult friends. And I'd give anything to have somebody just to talk about this stuff, because there's so much to it that I can't even put into words for people that don't live this life. And I don't mean to come off as a victim. I just mean to be honest about what it is, and the struggle. So when I was around 40, I finally went to my first national conference, and it was life-changing, honestly. There's nothing like what I call being around my own kind, and I wish it happened more than every 2 years. And thanks to COVID, it was 4 years before I got to be around my own kind. And I like to joke around and say, there's no place like Tourettesville, and I click my heels like Dorothy. And it was a wonderful feeling to be around my own people that were all alike, and where I was the majority. So people like me were the majority. It was loud and raucous and wild, and the only time in our lives we don't have to suppress our tics and not even give a thought to it. And that's the other kind of thing is everybody wants to fit in, and nobody wants to stand out in a bad way. And suppressing tics is just inherent. Everybody would try to do that. We don't want to do it in front of others. We don't want to do it when we're all alone by ourselves, because it hurts, it's exhausting, it's a waste of time. Break things that are valuable and precious to me, drop things, spill things. It's spill hot coffee almost daily on my chest. It's a nuisance. It's a waste of time. So the suppressing is just, an effort that, I feel really tight and rigid at all times, and many of us do, because we're always trying to hold back the next tick. And for every tick that people do see, I've held back 50 or more. So it's not as easy as saying it doesn't bother someone. And I say this lightly because I am blessed with so many friends and family members who help me more than I think I deserve. But I'm so blessed. But I rarely say my Tourette's OCD, it is really bothering me. And It's always bothered me, but it has to be so bad for me to say it out loud that I'm pretty desperate. So naturally, because they love me, they say, and they want to make me feel better and say, don't worry about it. It doesn't bother me. Or don't worry, I don't even notice anymore. And I know they mean well. I do. But it's not about them at that moment. It's no pain for me or somebody you may know or meet someday or love. Sorry. It's a cry for help. And as we say, in our office at work, when we talk to our trainees that they're going into healthcare, and we hook them up with families with children with disabilities of all types. You may not know the person's disability. You may not know much about it. A good friend of mine has a daughter with Down syndrome, as she so eloquently says in her story. When she had her daughter, she heard many things like I did, like, well, you could have more kids, right? Pretty sure I could, but this is the one I want right now. I wanted Sam. And we hear that, and again, people don't mean to be cruel, I'm sure. But when she had her daughter, people didn't know what to say, and same with me. And sometimes they don't say anything, and it's understandable. But one of the best things that somebody ever said to her was, you know, I don't know much about Down syndrome, but I care about you, so I'd like to learn more. And that's all I'm asking. It's hard to know. Scott will talk in a minute here. And even he, after living with me for many years, can't understand what all it is I go through. He's shocked at what all it involves and sees me deal with. So my effort in doing this, because I'm going out on a limb here, because this is out of my comfort zone, is to say, I'd like you to know more. I'd like people to understand it better and to listen and just listen. And because I care about you, whoever you are that has these afflictions, I want to know and be willing to be educated. So thanks for bearing with me. That's the first time I've tried to do this. So thank you. Not telling Sam's story, but this story indeed. So what it says here at my first conference, like I said, this word, haunted by scrupulosity, didn't even know it had a word, but it was at one of those national conferences where I met, I think the second one that I attended, where I met a doctor afterwards. For the first time ever, I said out loud that I have religious obsessions. And I felt so guilty for saying that, like I was complaining for having to say prayers all the time. I'm incessant prayers that last for hours, and it never felt right. And I felt like I was betraying God just by saying that out loud. Because as a kid, I thought everybody did that. And then I realized not everyone does. And why aren't they? And who's keeping me alive if I'm doing this for everybody? Because I was never worried about myself dying, but was anybody. I didn't understand, because children can't. So at this age, finally, when someone said, yes, there's a name for that, it's called scrupulosity. And there are other people that have it, and it goes back as far as hundreds of years. And he gave me the names of a couple books and articles that I can read. And he assured me that I wasn't alone in that. And that meant a lot. Okay, next slide, please. So this here is an example of scrupulous obsessions, and I'm guessing that you haven't heard of that. So the first one here on the screen is intrusive thoughts. And I got a lot of them. And I remember when I was around, this is the difference. This is still OCD. And my OCD isn't that I'm like a germaphobe. I mean, I like to be clean. And I certainly had to be vigilant during Sam's life and during COVID and stuff. But that's not my jam. That's a lot of people that suffer with OCD do have that cleanliness, but there's different. This is a lesser known, the scrupulosity. So yeah, I'm going to attempt to explain it. So I remember when I was around 17 or 18, I worried constantly that I had committed blasphemy because of the thoughts that seemed to come out of nowhere, that were the antithesis of everything that I held dear about my faith and about God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. I remember writing long letters to my boyfriend who was away at college, hoping that he could reassure me that I hadn't committed blasphemy, or even worse, an unpardonable sin. The thought that I could be doomed to hell because of mere thought that I had no control over was terrifying. And if it were true, then I would be spending the rest of my life begging God for forgiveness, because the intrusive thoughts just kept coming, and each one was going to have to be dealt with, forgiven, and negated. Motive doubting, the next one. In my long litany of prayers, I would repeatedly ask for forgiveness for all of my sins, all of those known and unknown, because they all had to be acknowledged, or else. If I would later remember an offense that I hadn't included in previous prayer, even though that technically should have been covered under the unknown umbrella of unknown sins, I would have to start the prayers all over again, reciting the same sins as before, and then include the new so-called sin, because many of the things that I felt guilty for probably weren't even sins in the first place, but rather something that I felt guilty about, so they had to be included just in case. And then again, follow all of that new prayer up with all of those known and unknown. Meanwhile, I was still a student, a daughter, a friend, a sister, a teammate, a member of 4-H and other clubs, president of my class, and had many other roles. So to have to do or perform all of these prayers and rituals was such a burden. And even now at 55 years old, I feel guilty for saying that it was a burden. Meaning, how dare I think the saying prayers and or asking for forgiveness was a waste of time, or is, or that somehow I am so special that I shouldn't have to be burdened with such a thing. Shame with these disorders has no bounds. I didn't understand what the difference was between guilt and shame. I knew my whole life I felt guilty. And that's kind of the way intrusive OCD, they call it the doubting disorder. And you feel guilty if you don't have things just right. And guilt can be a great emotion, as I tell kids sometimes, because we should feel guilt for things that we've actually done on purpose that were wrong or hurt other people. And it is an emotion that can keep you from doing that again, and you should have remorse over that and hopefully learn a lesson. So guilt is, an emotion for something you've done, but shame is an emotion for who you are. And I just have been mired in shame my whole life. Like I was born wrong, defective, a misfit, a freak, just can't get my act together. Just shame. And back to that exercise we did, the most embarrassing moment. Every single time you have those moments again and again every day, and every time you're mocked and ridiculed and pointed at and whispered about, chips away a little bit more at your self-esteem, which wasn't, in plenty to begin with. So the next one, the altruistic obsessions. So this too has plagued me at times, but it's not as unrelenting as the others, thankfully. The intrusive sexual thoughts, what it says here, as you can see, worry, you get sexually aroused around children. Yikes, thankfully, I've never had this particular one. But again, this knows no bounds and people do suffer with this. But I have had those thoughts at the most inopportune times. Like when I was in church when I was in my 30s, I was, excuse me, I was happily married and was a mom of two amazing young boys. And there were a handful of times that we'd be in church and I would have the strong need to look at the pastor's crotch. I can assure you that I was not attracted to him whatsoever, but the urge to do that was so strong and painful within that I would fight it until I couldn't fight it anymore. And then quickly glance at his crotch. Of course, he was wearing clothes at the time, but it still felt sinful and abhorrent for me to even consider. So after the quick glance, the need had been taken care of, but then it was replaced with so much shame for looking down there. And not just to another man that wasn't my husband, but a man of God, no less. What kind of monster must I have been? Must I be, I would think to myself, to do that. So because of that fact, that my mind was so busy during those sermons, I couldn't just sit there and listen to the message and the sermons, which I usually always learn from, which usually bring me peace. And I usually enjoyed when I didn't have those thoughts. The urges falls into the previous category. And then the last on here is images. Sexual images of our religious figures. This one haunts me as well at times. But the shame that it brings to even think of these things, let alone say them here, to all of you, don't allow me to do that right now. But can you imagine having those kinds of thoughts about someone so sacred to you and the overwhelming sense of disgust and pain that must cause? Okay, next slide, please, Brenda. So this I like because the cycle just, for me, really illustrates what it's like. You can see at the top there, the obsession. So that pops into our minds, and that leads to thinking errors, catastrophic interpretation. Like I said, it feels catastrophic if you don't act on these obsessions with ritual or compulsion. And the or else is the catastrophic interpretation. That leads to, on the cycle, the fear of sin, fear of God, pathological doubt. And it does. It's not a healthy fear of God, like the Bible talks about, like fear of reverence, fear that you're going to be struck down or that you're going to be the cause of someone to die. And that leads to distress. Oh yeah, distress times a million, inside, outside, internally, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Distress leads to the compulsion, the neutralization, because you need to neutralize the thought with an action that makes no sense, even to us once we're old enough to realize that, but it doesn't care. So you do that. And then you get temporary relief with increased sensitivity to the obsession. So there's a thing within our brains that we try and fight it, we hold it back, we hold it back with all of our might, try not to give into it. We know it's not real, but it feels so painful that we just do it. Whatever, the tapping, the touching, the jumping, the poking, the pointing, whatever it is, the tick, the ritual, whatever, we do it. And then for a nanosecond, we feel better because we scratched that itch that we just couldn't get to way down deep. But then in our brains, the reward center of our brain says, aha, that felt good. That got her to do it. So then it kicks up the heat and then you're back to the obsession again. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the chart I put together, just myself from my own experiences about scrupulosity versus my Christian belief. And I want to point out here that studies over time and books and historical artifacts show that scrupulosity has been pointed out for numerous religions, not just Christian, but numerous religions. So it's a part of OCD, which of course we know can cross all genders, ages, ethnicities. You know, no one's exempt. So can scrupulosity. So I just want to point that out. So this is my table here. The first one, scrupulosity, says I am God's bodyguard. Now, the reason I say that is because if you're very close to me at all, you know that hearing God's name or Jesus' name in vain absolutely sets my soul on fire. And this doesn't mean that I judge the person who's saying it or that I'm mad at them. And I'm not above, sinning, breaking a Ten Commandment, whatever, but that one has always been something that has just pierced me. And since the age of 6, whenever I hear it, I can't unhear it. And I, little Jackie, for whatever reason, feel like I self-appointed myself God's bodyguard, and I have to make it in. I have to make it right, because I hear that, and believe me, I can hear it a mile away. And I know when it's coming up on songs, and I'll turn down the radio, and I can be around people or in a restaurant and hear it and hear it and hear it. I can't not hear it. Many of us have hypervigilance for these types of things, but also just because we're on guard and we see people in public mimicking us or whatever. So you're just kind of alert to all of that. So when I hear someone use God's name in vain, so I have to do that. I have to hear it, feel it, and it causes pain. And then I know that it counts. Bizarre, I know. So I know intellectually God never appointed me to be his bodyguard. He can handle it himself. And when I have my moments of quiet time with them, he assures me of that. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't care. Every time, no matter how fast someone is firing those off, I have to say something in my mind, negate it, feel it, hear it, do it. That's scrupulosity. And my Christian belief says God does not expect me to right other people's wrongs. And that's the fact. And I know that. But it still remains. I'm working on it. I've had years of counseling. I'm getting somewhere, but it's real, and it's a struggle. And even an OMG, even in a text, will set me off. So unless the name of God and Jesus is spoken in total reverence to him, like in church, or when you're actually talking about him in a way that's not a swear word or just flippantly, that's the only way I can hear it and not react. Again, this isn't for anyone else's burden but mine, but this is the onus that we have when we have these things. It's different for everybody, but it plagues us and it's everywhere. So the next one, if I don't perform rituals perfectly, someone will die. Okay, I covered that already, but as an intelligent adult now, I can tell myself, even though I have the urge to have my right over left, twist myself in a pretzel when I'm worried about my son, who's a police officer, and he's on duty, and I'm trying to keep him safe, and I'm trying to keep him alive, and I do all my magical prayers in my mind and outwardly, and it takes me 2 hours to get ready for bed because I got things to do and all of that jazz. I can tell myself, by doing all of that, did that keep my mom alive, or my child alive, or my dog's alive even? No. And believe me, I tried. So I know that I can't keep them alive, but it makes me feel like I can. Just this one time, you slip up, Jackie, just once. Something's going to happen. It's going to be all your fault. Then you're going to be sorry. That's what it tells me. On the other side, only God has the power over life and death. That's the truth. I'm longing to get there, but this is what it does. The next one, I must kiss and touch the Bible, or God will think I don't love him. Truth, God knows I love him, because believe me, I tell him all the time, all day long. Worship him, honor him, read his word, love him. He must be sick of me saying, hi God, love you, love you, love you. But that's the way I feel. I'm better about, kissing and touching Bibles and crosses when I go by them, and I can actually get by them, usually I have to at least peek at them. Can't just not acknowledge them, that they're there. And if I stuff my hands in my pants really down deep in my pockets, I can sprint past it and not have to touch it, but not always. And then the last one, I must keep praying until it feels just right or something bad will happen. When the truth is, God knows my every thought, hears my every prayer, and no need to keep repeating the same prayer. And again, I'm getting better. This too is a red flag about if you feel like your child, your student, your patient has this incessant obsession about religion that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what they're being taught in Bible school or something like that, or hearing from home, this could be a red flag as well. Okay, next slide, please, Brenda, and then I'll turn it over. Okay, this cracks me up. I think it's pretty clever. I thought of myself. So there was a commercial years ago for some kind of wellness program, and it started off by saying, studies have shown that people who move a lot tend to live longer. And I remember looking at my husband saying, I'm going to live for freaking ever. I'm going to live to biblical ages. Excuse me. But anyway, of course, he knew what I meant, and we had a good laugh about it. But there are many times when the fact that those of us with Tourette's and do move around a lot, but it's not by our choice. We're often exhausted. And I remember one time a friend said to me, wow, you must be exhausted by 10 o'clock every night. And I said, I'm exhausted by 10 a.m., but I still have things to do. And by that, I mean, as soon as our feet hit the floor in the morning, the battle is on. No weekends off, no nights off, no holidays off. It's on. If we're awake, we're in battle for both mind and body. And I'm immediately aware when I get out of bed, which foot hits the ground first, and it better be the right one. And as soon as I leave the bedroom, it's going to be the right foot that steps over the threshold of the doorway. So the illustration here is Scott and I both have these fitness watches, as I'm sure many of you do as well. And they can be a great tool for, helping people meet their goal of getting enough steps in and tracking their sleep, checking their heart rate, and lots of other, great information. But on my watch, which is a Garmin, which I do really like, it has a feature that monitors your stress level. I really don't know, how it does that or exactly what it uses to measure or gauge your stress level, but it is kind of cool. And you can check out at the end of the day to see a timeline of your activity. For instance, when I'm teaching exercise classes, which I do, that's one of my side gigs, is I've been teaching exercise classes for 25 years now. And as I like to say, I've been jumping for 50 years, so now I just get paid for it. Plus, all of the music is in a 4/8 timed rhythm, 32 perfect numbers, love it. Back to the watch. So the activity that it talks about, okay, like when I'm teaching, so to speak, or whatever the exercise classes, it shows gray bars on that chart to show that I'm active at that time. And then it shows some orange bars that signify stress, whatever that. Those orange bars for me are actually there all day long, but possibly the lines are a little bit heavier or darker than when I'm not exercising. It also displays blue bars for your periods of rest, which almost never ever show up on any of my days, sadly. And it also has these cute little icons that represent an exercise that you may be doing at the time, such as it has a running icon or biking icon, etc. So imagine my surprise when I found out that I had been swimming for hours at a time at night, and I didn't even get wet or know I was doing it. Because apparently the watch, it could tell that my arms were in constant motion, even flailing at times. And since it couldn't identify what type of so-called exercise I was doing, it just defaults to, she must be swimming. So then it would also give me this helpful little message that reads, quote, you had very few restful moments on this day. Remember to slow down and rest to keep yourself going. Or this one's even better. Quote, you had almost no restful moments on this day. Stress consumes your body's resources. Okay? If you are stressed for long periods of time, you may become exhausted. Wow, thanks for that news. I'm kidding, but still, that's a powerful illustration of how things happen here and with this body of mine. So the icon you see here on the left looks very much like the one on my watch, which is supposedly to remind me of what I was doing, suggesting that it was a pleasant activity. But the image you see on the right is actually how I feel during those times. Help me, I'm drowning. My point of this story is that I'm tired of swimming, never getting anywhere. These disorders, it does not care how tired you are, how frustrating it is, how it makes you feel, how much it hurts, how many accidents you've had while performing tics and rituals, how many relationships it's cost you. It is weird, and we know it. I remember the doctor that finally diagnosed me saying, "Oh, don't worry about telling me anything embarrassing. There's nothing you can tell me that's any weirder than I've already heard about these disorders." And I remember thinking, "Oh yeah, you want to bet? Buckle up." When I was finally diagnosed at 22 years of age, after this long, extensive time, I did go to a doctor at a hospital who should have been trained to catch everything that I was doing at age 14. After 6 months, just told my parents I didn't know what my problem was and thought I had the world by the tail. And that just made my life harder because it kind of solidified what the notion that I could just stop it if I truly wanted to, as if it's a sheer lack of willpower on my part. And because of that missed opportunity, 8 more long years of suffering physically, socially, mentally, before I'd get the proper diagnosis. And at age 22, when I did finally get diagnosed, that same doctor immediately, within 5 minutes, said, "You know, you're a classic case of Tourette's and OCD, and textbook case. You know, there's no way that should have been missed," because I knew as soon as you walked in. So no one wants to run out and get that diagnosis by any means, but to me, I was so thankful. And I've met other adults that weren't diagnosed till they were adults. I've given anything to know there's a name for it as a kid. And that's why I do this, so other people won't get missed along the way, and to demystify what this strange stuff is all about. Because we hear through media so many things about it, and most of them aren't true, and they're not funny. So I'll be back, but I'm going to turn this over to Scott now, my counterpart.
Switch seats.
Here.
Well, I don't know about how it is at your place, but we have a severe acute Kleenex deficiency here. So I hope my makeup hasn't run. As Brenda said earlier, in my practice early on, I developed an interest and expertise in care of critically ill newborns and older children. And my smallest surviving guy is about 12 and a half ounces. He's a teenager, and periodically we exchange texts. Because of what I did, I developed a large population of special needs individuals, and over time I dedicated my life to helping people and families with special needs, trying to make their lives better. Over time, I realized that I think the best way of caring for those people was to keep on seeing them until I retired. So my oldest patient is in her mid-40s, not your kind of average pediatric patient.
Brenda,
Switch slide, Brenda. Thanks. So I thought I was well informed about Tourette syndrome. I knew about tics and the diagnostic criteria, and then I met Jackie, and I entered a whole new world of Tourette knowledge. I became aware of the daily struggles that were not just about tics, but witnessed how debilitating all the comorbidities could be for her. And now I'm mostly retired after 40 years of practice. However, I continue to see old and new patients with Tourette syndrome. And one of the real advantages of being retired is that we can visit schools and educate staff and other students and help families in that way. A little bit about tics. Next slide. Tics are common in kids. Some estimates say that as many as 20% of children have tics. In my experience, that's probably, I think that number is significantly less, and my tick DAR is always on high alert. So I don't think I miss a lot of them. Still, it's not an uncommon cause for a visit to the doctor. I think some doctors are as uncomfortable about using the T word as the parents are. After all, isn't it really called a nervous tick? Children don't know why they tick. When parents ask, they may report that their eyes itch or their nose itch. And oftentimes a physical diagnosis is preferred by the family and by the doctors. It's easier to write that off than to explain ticks. And I think that reflects the common thing that Jackie saw when she was a child. Children get referred to otolaryngologists, to ophthalmologists, to allergists in an attempt to sign a physical cause. Children often end up on medicines or getting allergy shots or getting glasses, and all of which are predictably without effect. Experienced physicians usually can readily identify the problem and prevent all those referrals that many kids go through. But you can't just tell a family that it's a tick and leave it at that. The relative frequency of ticks and how common they are in children needs to be reviewed, and the ever-changing character of ticks need to be reviewed. Just because they're doing one thing at one time doesn't mean that that's what they'll be doing next. And the fact that the vast majority of children have spontaneous resolution of ticks needs to be reviewed with the family, and also how to manage them at home. Children need, or families need to be told to ignore and not correct. Correct ticks, in fact, trying to get children to suppress them is often extremely anxiety producing for children. And parents should be informed. I think it's also important for people to know that unless children have really loud vocal tics, most peers just don't care. I think parents worry that their kids are going to be made fun of, and in general, if they've got minor phonic tics or motor tics, other kids just don't care. And kind of an example of that is one time my son was playing Little League, and the pitcher on his team that day clearly had Tourette syndrome. Lots of gyrations and lots of OCD behaviors. And we got to the end of the game, and I said, "Peter, how do you think Johnny pitched today?" Said, "I thought he looked good." So they just don't care. Most kids just don't care. Most teachers don't recognize motor tics. And if they do ask about it, and it's just a simple tic disorder, I suggest saying maybe it's not a good idea, that the family can tell them that it's just a habit behavior, and don't use the T word, because I don't want to have teachers assign some unnecessary psychological diagnosis to that. Similarly, when kids ask what's going on, kids can just say, "Well, I don't know, my eyes itch, or it's just something that my face does." And hardly ever do I hear children who ask more. They're satisfied with that. They're not like going into depth with it. Talking about more Tourette syndrome, the diagnosis isn't always immediately apparent. Kids don't come in with a 1-year history of vocal tics and motor tics occurring at the same time. And oftentimes it kind of begins gradually, as Jackie said. Oh, new slide, please. And oftentimes when you interview families about, they come in with a concern about whether or not their children, why are they making those noises, or why are they doing that? They're often unaware that they're having other vocal and motor tics. They just haven't, their tic DAR isn't as developed. Then once everything is put together, they'll think back, "Oh yeah, I've been doing this. He's been doing this for a while." And physicians can just miss it, just as they did with Jackie. They can miss the diagnosis and miss the tics also. As you work to help secure a diagnosis of Tourette syndrome, it's important to ask about family history. Although Tourette is not inherited as a dominant or recessive trait, there definitely is a familial tendency to have mental health issues, whether they're related to anxiety, OCD, ADHD, or any other mental health issues. That makes a diagnosis of Tourette more likely. If there's no diagnosis, or if there are no other familial mental health issues, then it more likely will be a self-limited, in my experience, a more likely self-limited simple tic disorder. I think it's vitally important to, as most people think of Tourette syndrome as people who have tics and swear. But I think it's really important as you manage children with Tourette syndrome to inquire about the comorbidities. Are there issues with anxiety, OCD, ADHD, behavioral issues, sleep problems, learning problems, social interaction issues? And sometimes I found that the diagnosis of Tourette syndrome can be a unifying diagnosis, a unifying one for the family, that suddenly all the things that they've been going through the past years are explained by this diagnosis, which helps to make their lives immeasurably better. Again, as this is happening, parents need to be informed you just can't stop kids from having tics. And once the diagnosis is made, I think it's really important to reach out to the family and define the comorbidities. I think it's helpful to reach out to teachers at that point to help them understand what they're seeing in class, that behavior should be ignored. If you can get someone with Tourette syndrome or a Tourette expert to come and educate the family, that's ideal. Some children with Tourette choose to educate their classmates. Many times, in my experience, the comorbidities are far more problematic than the tics. Too many times, also, things I've seen over time, too many times when deciding on treatment, too many physicians automatically target the tics the first, because after all, they have Tourette syndrome. But medications for the treatment of tics are never completely effective and may have significant adverse effects. And sometimes antipsychotics are prescribed to children early on when other modes of intervention, such as CBIT, behavioral intervention therapy, has been tried. And as I said, before I married Jackie, I shared the feeling of most physicians that Tourette was primarily a tic disorder. Living with her has helped me to realize that it is so much more. As we talk in the office about Tourette, I think over time it's become obvious to me that most of the time the problems that impact these families, the greatest, are not the tics but the comorbidities. And so as I ask questions about those disorders, I help to legitimize behaviors that the children have been having and that the parents are trying to cope with, and also help the children to know that, hey, this is real and I'm not just crazy, as Jackie often said. And as I go over those things with them, I'm often met by looks from the kids that, how did you know about that? How did you know? Because they'd never shared it with their parents. How did they know about all the little obsessions that they had? And as we decide about treatment of Tourette, we discuss which is the behavior that is impacting the child and the family at the most. And sometimes it's the child is having tics at home and it bothers the family and they'd like them to go away. The child doesn't really know that they're doing it. It's not causing problems in school. So the message is live with it. You just can't, it's not, if it ain't hurting nothing, you don't fix it. Other times we find that the OCD or anxiety behaviors are overwhelming for children and create havoc throughout the day, and that's the behavior that's targeted. And I also try to always recommend the many resources and innumerable resources of the Tourette Association. It just has a ton of good things for families to access. Sometimes families are interested in reaching out to other local families impacted by Tourette syndrome, and we're able to facilitate that. I think it often helps my families to know that my wife has Tourette syndrome and she's met many of them. I often cite her diagnosis when I'm talking to other kids who don't have Tourette syndrome but have mental health issues, just to help them feel more at ease that it's okay to have mental health issues. And as I said, now we meet now with families and or school personnel and students to help educate them, make them feel better, to help them know it's okay to have Tourette syndrome. You can live a great life and be inspiring to many people if you have it. So she's made me a better physician in dealing with patients with Tourette syndrome. And with mental health issues and with chronic people. So we're still running out of Kleenex here. So I'm bringing Jackie back in.
What a dog and pony show we have going on here.
And if you've been hearing noises, it's our dog scratching to get in and help us. So
okay, next slide, Brenda. We're almost done here, but I just want to follow through. Thank you, Scott. Like Scott said, so the most important takeaway, getting to the heart of that, what impacts the patient most, and individualize, and the last one is the most important, always leave room for hope. And hearing from people who have lived experience like myself, or anyone with lived experience, is just imperative, because we're the true experts of our story. If you hear there's a local expert on Tourette's, they may be very good from, people they've had in their clinic, from what lectures, from textbook and all of that, but unless you have it yourself or have a close loved one with it, there's just hardly any way that you could be a true expert on all of the nuances with that. So hearing from us it's vital. Okay, last slide, Brenda. Looky there. Okay, so this is my son Samuel that I was telling you about, and he is awesome. When he was born, the doctors were quick to tell us how bad our life would be, and nothing could be further from the truth. They found the need to tell us every single day a list of nevers, the things he would never do. He will never walk, talk, see, hear, vegetative state, death before age 1. Every day. He'll never walk, talk, see, hear, vegetative state, death before age 1. And I remember saying, well, I don't care what he can or can't do. We just want him. That doesn't matter, as if that's the only thing that signifies a good life. And it was like, if they saw any hope in my eyes, they're quick to squash it. But I have a list of nevers that are much more important about Samuel. You know what he never do? It's much more important. He never think a bad thought, or do a bad word, or say a bad word, or do a bad deed. He never judged anyone. He never held a grudge. Never drove drunk, did drugs, broke my heart, never hurt anyone's feelings. He just loved and wanted to be loved. What the doctors at that time, early in his life, saw as so imperfect, he wasn't even worthy of life itself at the beginning, I saw as such sheer perfection that I wasn't even worthy of. And he made me a better person. I felt like I was on holy ground when I was around him. Yeah, he couldn't walk or talk, it didn't matter. There was over 1,000 people at his wake after we lost him, for this little nugget that wasn't quite 12, that could never say a word, witness to more people in his short life than I could in with my millions of words I say every day. There was hundreds more at the funeral the next day. So don't ever discount someone for what they look like or sound like, what their bodies do that they can't control, what their bodies don't do that they wish they could. I hope you've learned some new things today. I love life. I love people. If you can't tell, as I told our trainees every year, I love people, not in a weird way, but kind of close. I love hugs. I like to touch people. You can have a great life with this. It's a struggle, but it can be great and it can be beautiful. And I spent most of my life running around, giving talks about Samuel and saying with full confidence and assurance that God doesn't make mistakes. So Samuel was made perfectly exactly the way he's supposed to be made. But yet I still believe that I was somehow imperfect and defective. And I bought into that till I was about 50. And I don't want one more person to buy into that. There's no reason for shame. We didn't ask for it. It isn't fun, but we can have a great, awesome, wonderful life. And it often gives us so much more empathy and compassion for other people. And that's nothing but a good thing. So thank you for joining us. And if people are still around and you have any questions, we will be glad to answer. I see Haley. Y'all are so resilient. God bless. Thank you so much.
Jackie and Scott, thank you so much for such an amazing webinar. I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your time. We do have a few questions. We have a question here. Oh, no, it was actually a comment. So someone commented that you are so resilient and God bless you.
Very nice. Thank you.
Okay. So if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or to put them in the question pane.
Yes, we don't mind. We're an open book. Thank you for your time and patience, everyone.
Okay. So I'm sorry, Jackie.
No, I was just, you may have was going to say where they can watch this if they missed it today or if they like a recording.
Yes, so there aren't any more questions in the question pane right now, but for right now, at the TAA, we have a full-time information and referral staff member who can answer all of your questions through email at support@tourette.org or by phone at calling 1-888-4-TOURETTE, TOURET. So Jackie and Scott, once again, thank you so much for an excellent presentation. Everyone, I would just like to let you know that everyone on this webinar, this is all the time that we have for our webinar right now. Once the webinar is closed, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we'll greatly appreciate if you would complete the survey and provide your feedback. And this webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube page. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So Jackie and Scott, thank you so much once again and have an amazing night.
Thanks.
You too, Brenda.
I hope
Thank
it
you.
went well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, good night, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.